Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. I want to thank Dr. Rafi for inviting me, and I want to also thank the wonderful faculty and the dean of the agriculture school that I met, and a lot of you that I've met as well at my lunch table. It's been really enjoyable, and I've enjoyed the energy that these people, that you all have, that you're bringing to what you're doing. Even the ride over, I was brought over by Troy Tucker, actually, and he was describing all the hard work that he does to farm his 1 acre, and I was just thinking, really? And I just sit on the other end and eat all of it. And when you guys are talking about the berries, keep on making them, because I just eat them all year round. What I'd like to do today is talk about superfoods, and I want to actually start by saying I kind of had to argue with the publisher because that was her idea. I really did not like that word. It sounds kind of like a buzzword, and it didn't feel like it had, I don't know, the scientific background that it needed. But in talking actually to Dr. Rafi, I realized, and actually listening to what's been going on today, that marketing is going to be the most important thing, because really in the end you can grow everything that's wonderful and healthy, but if you can't convince the consumer to purchase it, nobody's going to grow it. So hopefully you grow it and they'll buy it. So I understand the importance now with that. What I want to do is cover basically what are superfoods, give you sort of a working definition, because obviously I think everybody knows there is no legal definition for that term. Why do we need them? Why do we want them? How do we spot them? What is it about a food as you're considering, or the consumer's considering to purchase it, that makes it something that they can identify? And what does the American consumer think about superfoods? So a little bit of a historical perspective. This is one of my absolute favorite quotes. In fact, I think I use this to start off all my classes at Wayne State. But it's been attributed to Huang Ti, the so-called Yellow Emperor, who sometimes is also thought of as perhaps legendary, but sometimes just alternatively, it's a Chinese proverb. He that takes medicine and neglects to diet himself, and I love the way they use that as a verb, wastes the time of the physician. So from the very earliest times, people recognized that there was a link between what we eat and our health. Here's some other perspectives around the globe. The Brits kind of pointing out that you can kill yourself with your diet. And then over to France, where they elevated it to sort of an art form. And then the Germans gave us that very practical, that we still have today, we are what we eat. And then a more unfortunate and apathetic approach from our side of the world. I never worry about diets. The only carrots that interest me are the number you get in a diamond. So of course it's run the gamut, if people think nutrition and diet are important to health and those that don't. But relative to superfoods, if you do a Google search, you'll find, millions, obviously, in a very short time of links for superfoods. But the very earliest mention of superfoods goes back to 1915, and then in 1949 in the dictionary. And they said that it was a food considered especially nutritious or otherwise beneficial to health and well-being. So you can see that it's sort of a, well, not very specific definition. So what I think today, what it means to us, given what's going on in our culture and some of the issues, the health problems that we're having, I think it's a revisit of a phrase we used to use when I was learning nutrition, which was back in the day, and that was this idea of nutrient-dense foods. And again, back in that day, it was all about the things we're familiar with, essential nutrients like vitamins and minerals. Now that's been expanded to these things that are usually referred to, these compounds called phytochemicals. Phytochemicals, we'll see the definition on another slide, but those are those compounds that are not, strictly speaking, nutrients that we're familiar with, but we know that they probably promote health. But another aspect of this nutrient density is the idea that we're going to get essential nutrients and or phytochemicals for few calories. And so that's the important concept, versus foods that don't give us much for the calories that they give us, and sometimes too many calories. The way I always explain this when I do presentations to consumers is the easy way to think about it is think of your calorie as $1. I'm a cheapskate. So to me, I want to get the most product. I want to get the biggest, the best product for the fewest dollars that I have to give up. And that's exactly the way we want to approach eating and foods. So essential nutrients, we're mostly familiar with these. These are the old standbys: vitamins A, C, D, E, and K, and a slew of B vitamins. And for the most part, we have to obtain these through our diet. The body can't make them. Now, over time, scientists have figured out, well, actually, vitamin D is not strictly speaking essential because we make it by exposure to sunlight. But some of these vitamins are still considered essential because we don't make enough most of the time. And then we have minerals, that again, iron, copper, things that we need, the amino acids that we find in protein foods, and specific fatty acids in the fats that we eat. So those are the essential nutrients. But the whole area of phytochemicals is very complex. We would basically think of these things as compounds that occur naturally, mostly in plants, hence that first part of the word phyto. But there are some animal foods that also have phytochemicals. They're biologically active in the body. That means they do things in the body that basically we hadn't expected. Some of those functions are listed up on the slide. So many of you have heard the term antioxidant. Well, all kinds of diseases are now being attributed to that oxidative damage, which we can actually see, I guess when we see rusty metal and that sort of thing. Anti-inflammatory is also the next biggest area. So there are compounds that prevent inflammation in the body. And inflammation is linked to heart disease, diabetes, very many chronic diseases. And then you also see some other things, for example, in the area of cancer, in preventing cancer. Some compounds serve as promoting apoptosis, which means basically that the cancer cell, instead of spreading, kills itself. It just dies off, which is a very good thing. Now, those biologic activities, and a lot of those are theoretical, but I would say that's a list of probably the hot areas. In terms of the categories of phytochemicals, that's too complex to get into, but I think the ones we hear about more often than not are the carotenoids. So that's where you would have, for example, beta-carotene, which we all know is the supposed vitamin A in carrots. And beta-carotene actually had always been thought of only in terms of its conversion to vitamin A in our body, but now we're seeing it's a very powerful antioxidant in and of itself. So the polyphenols, again, very complicated. When I was writing the book, I was making my head spin trying to keep, the polyphenol and the flavonoid and keeping those all straight. So I think it's an area that is kind of uncomfortable for most of us, and it's certainly complex even for the people who study them. But I think the bottom line here is food contains these other compounds that are not, strictly speaking, nutrients, essential nutrients, and yet they promote health. So looking at superfoods as being nutrient dense, if you were to plot on a graph, let's say, comparing 4 different foods. So here we've got broccoli, tuna fish, soda pop, and potato chips. And you'll notice that if you were to, and you could take any nutrient, give it a different color, and if you're going to consider a 100-calorie portion, what kind of nutrient do you get back for giving up those 100 calories? Because again, most of us don't have extra calories that we can afford. And of course, obviously, broccoli and tuna fish give you so many nutrients for giving up that 100 calories. So that's basically, it's a pretty simple idea. Get the most for your calorie. So why do we need them? Well, most of us have heard about all the things people die of: cardiovascular diseases, which includes primarily heart attacks and strokes, but there are others. Diabetes, which is a major disease as well, mainly though contributing to other diseases, and in particular CVD, through heart attacks and strokes. Now, some scientists would actually call obesity a disease in and of itself. I think, though, probably the best we can say about obesity is that for some people, and not all, by the way, I know the news media would make you think, whoa, if somebody's overweight or obese, that's it. But that's not true. For some people, it's not as big of a problem related to disease as for others. But there are individuals who obesity will definitely put them at risk, and mostly for CVD and diabetes. And you see that it makes up quite a few of the people in our country, men and women, somewhere around almost 25%. Now, the way it's assessed, if you've never done this, is the body mass index, which you can see the little calculation up there. And the reason why I wanted to show you that is because when you hear these statistics, it's important kind of to know what they're referring to. And we'll look at some BMIs and what they look like. But basically, overweight is 25 to just under 30, and then obesity starts at 30. So watch this picture of the country, starting out with yellow, going to magenta. And from 1985 to into the 2000s, you see the number or the percent of Americans who are at that obesity BMI of 30 or greater. And that's what I think why people have called so much attention to this, calling it an epidemic. But again, what I like to point out is during the same time frame, the life expectancy has not gone down. It has continued to increase. So we do need to put it in perspective, but you can kind of see the dramatic difference. So I think then going back to superfoods, we all recognize we probably need to be careful with our calories, and so being careful with them means to get the most nutrients in return. This study was interesting. It was back in 2005, and they pointed out that really, if you looked at NFL players, more than half were obese, and in fact, fully a fourth of them were severely obese, which is now referred to as class 2 obesity, and even a tiny percent were in that very obese category of class 3. So this is double, basically, for the number of people, for men in that same age group. So in other words, obesity is affecting more and more of us, not just us regular folk. And then Barbie, which is what I grew up with, I think someone tongue-in-cheek when she turned 40 in 2010 suggested that she ended up looking like that. But while this has been going on, people gaining weight, we've also had a very disturbing trend of, I would call it that our role models, or what we would consider our ideal, have gotten very difficult to achieve. If you look at G.I. Joe in the first two pictures, that's what G.I. Joe on that's the left, right? Yeah, the left-hand side. When he first came out, back in, I assume, the 50s or so. And that's G.I. Joe now, and he is bulked up. Look at Ken, because again, he had a birthday too, the year after Barbie, and look how skinny he was back in the 60s, and now he's sort of very brawny. Or if you look at real life, a lot of people don't know who that is on the left in the swimsuit. Anybody know who that is? I know. I'm always dating myself. None of my students ever know who that is. Johnny Weissmuller, who was the Olympic gold medal winner for swimming in the 20s. And then a couple of my favorites, since I'm a sci-fi freak. You know, just the ideal has gotten increasingly, well, difficult to achieve. And I want to point out a couple of problems with BMI, which is the way they classify us. On the left, you probably don't know that guy, but he's from my hometown of Detroit. That's a famous hockey player. And he would have clocked in at 27. Well, that would have made him overweight. Or look at the guy next to him. You know him, especially more recently. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Would you call him obese? No. Tom Cruise. So in other words, BMI, especially as somebody becomes more physically fit, is not a good indicator for assessing obesity. And then the other problem with BMI is, relative to females, our role models have a very low BMI. And in fact, by the definition of the World Health Organization, they'd be considered undernourished. And a study that was done in 2000 plotted the body mass index of Miss America, starting from the 20, that's a picture of the 40s, all the way to 1999. Now, it'd be nice to see even more statistics, because I think that would have even plummeted further. But look at that. I mean, you can even see, 1944, she had some meat on her bones, you know. And even in 1986, considerably slimmed down. But we're not alone. If you look at the Philippines, in 2000, I don't know if you saw this news report, it was kind of interesting. The police department said, hey, you guys who are fat, if your waist exceeds 34, we're going to make you climb Mount Pinatubo. I hope they had good liability insurance, because I bet they had some heart attacks too. But in 2005, when they reassessed this, they found out, hey, all the programs that we put them through, they did not lose the weight. We still have a problem. So then they ordered them to take anti-obesity drugs. But we know about those drugs as well, not just the side effects, but they're not very useful, and you have to continue to take them. But this was one of my favorites. This was a professor, a nutrition professor at Kansas State University. And he ended up being called the Twinkie professor. But the whole point of what he did was point out how important calories are. You know, we'd like to forget about calories. What he did was he cut back 800 calories a day for 3 months, and he lost almost 30 pounds. I think that was his personal dietitian, Miss Debbie, because basically all he ate was, were little Hostess cakes and little Debbie snack cakes. And then, of course, he didn't want to keel over, so he took a vitamin, a protein shake, and some carrots. And he's not saying we should eat, that kind of a diet, but what he was trying to point out is, people talk about carbs, they talk about protein and all this other stuff, but really it's the calories, it's the energy. And that's kind of, again, where Superfoods comes in. It's the idea of maximizing the health-promoting nutrients in the least amount of calories, because they do count. And guess who they count for the most? Women. This was a shocking study to me, and this basically pointed out that, when you get older, if you're not skinny to start with, and if you don't exercise already, 60 minutes of moderate to high-intensity exercise, if that's not already your pattern, you're going to gain weight. And if you don't cut back on calories, even if you exercise, you're going to gain weight. So, again, it's very difficult for all of us, but in particular for aging women. And then even if you manage to lose weight, and this is not a slam against Oprah because that's actually her magazine cover, she basically could not keep that weight off. And if Oprah, who has a lot of talent and has a personal chef and a personal trainer, if she can't keep off the weight, how do you expect the rest of us folk to do it? And then you see those statistics from the NIH that basically even a small amount of weight that you might lose, like 10%, almost everybody gains it back when you look at 5 years down the road. So then what's the answer? Well, prevent the weight gain if you can, but focus on healthy eating and not so much on weight. I think that's really the take-home message to all of this. So back to superfoods, how they fit in. Fewer calories, more nutrients, more phytochemicals. And it's those phytochemicals that have captured our interest. The antioxidants, the anti-inflammatories that are implicated in heart disease. Again, heart disease, stroke, collectively all of CVD, diabetes that increases your risk for CVD, and actually several others. You don't have to read all the little words here, but basically the idea is that relative to inflammation, which is the new area, it's even, I think, outpacing antioxidants, some foods promote inflammation, and if you look over there, it's not too surprising. Foods that raise blood sugar, they have low fiber, starchy foods, grilling meat, you don't want to do that too often. But look at the list on the other side, the foods that fight inflammation. Pretty much, it's a little laundry list of superfoods. In fact, probably some of the things that you all are growing already. So how do we spot these superfoods? Let's look at some ways we can identify the superfoods. Well, now most of you, I recognize what you're growing, you don't have a food label, but that's still a good place to start because it points out that we use something called the daily value. So if you pick up your cereal box or whatever food you're eating, you'll notice that off in the pink, off to the side, that's the percent daily value. It's made up of two different sets of numbers. One would be the things we want to get more of, we want to make sure we get enough of, but then there are these other things, the DRVs, that we actually want to reduce in our diet. So you do have two things going on. When it comes to the things you want to increase, so that would be the RDAs, or the new term is DRIs, you're basically going to be looking at maximizing that percentage. And then, of course, the most important thing, and when they update the food label, they're thinking that the way to call attention to it is to make the calories even bigger, in other words, the font size, as if it's because we can't see the calories. Is that why we're eating too many? But that's one of the changes that's been proposed. Now, again, how do you compare two foods? Well, consider a specific range of calories, let's say 50 to 100 calories per portion, so that if you're looking at two foods side by side and you have the label, look for double digits. So when it's that daily value for the things that we want to get more of, and especially certain nutrients, protein, fiber, vitamin C, things that a lot of us are missing, you're looking for double digits. So 10% or more is a good starting point. If you don't have a food label, by the way, I've got a resource, a slide that shows you some websites you can go to see. You punch in a food and it'll tell you what the listing of daily values is. Now, I want to look at superfoods for a little bit, basically 4 slides, and I've lumped them in different categories. To me, the first group would be the familiar foods, and these are probably many of the ones that you're working with. Pretty much every berry, and I think Dr. Rafi showed you a beautiful slide of all the different berries. And berries, chock full of antioxidants, chock full of even essential nutrients, and just super low in calories. Most of them you're looking at 50 to 60, maybe 70 calories for a cup of those fresh berries. Leafy greens, I have to laugh because, I thought I was pretty smart after having been in the business for a while. I realized how dumb I actually am. I mean, I knew kale was good for you, but I had no idea. I forgot how good kale was for you. But in having to dig up all the information, you know, 1 cup of kale, you know, clocking it at maybe 30 calories or so, gives you 800% of what you need for the whole day for vitamin K. It gives you 200% of the potassium that you need, 100% of the vitamin C in just that 1 cup of cooked kale. So it pretty much is one of those leafy greens that's actually a superstar among superfoods. So I think in re-examining even the ones that are familiar to us, it can be very, very enlightening. And certainly everybody knows about the nuts. I mean, and every nut that's in existence. When they first started out, it was almonds, it was walnuts, but now they know that all of the different nuts contain phytochemicals and essential nutrients that are useful for us. And certainly herbs. That's a picture of rosemary. I think I was sharing with someone yesterday that, again, you know, it's not just that it contains one compound. It contains compounds that are named for it. And there's like a whole list of them. I don't know, I can't even remember the name, but rosemanol, rosacule, you know, all of these compounds that have special abilities to fight disease. And this next group I would call familiar but super, and I think I should have put an exclamation point, not a question mark there. For example, eggs. They've gotten such a bad rap for so long, but really, you know, eggs only give you, what, 60, 70 calories, depending on the size of the egg. They are one of the best sources of a nutrient called choline, which now scientists are realizing is very helpful in fighting liver disease, cardiovascular disease, and it's something that wasn't even on the map probably 20 years ago, and eggs are the best source. In addition, they contain the highest quality protein of protein foods in that small amount of calories. Milk, studies showing that milk's just as effective if you drink a glass of it after vigorous exercise at rebuilding or allowing for muscle to be rebuilt compared to, you know, fancy isolated protein supplements. And coffee, and don't get me started on coffee because that's just the best. I mean, 2 cups actually has B vitamins, manganese, so it's got nutrients that are essential nutrients, but beyond that, the way I look at it, the more coffee you drink, even the better. I mean, it's linked to reductions in cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, liver disease, and it's a hard sell. People think coffee is not good for you, and actually it is a true superfood because guess what? It has literally no calories until you start putting stuff in it. And chocolate, of course, a personal favorite of mine, very much linked to a reduction in blood pressure and risk for stroke. And what interested me was a study that came out last year that I just could not wrap my brain around. It was from Australia. They actually had a tough time convincing people to stay in a study that made them consume 2 ounces of dark chocolate a day to lower their blood pressure. Really? Seriously? 2 ounces? I could do that standing on my head. But evidently some people don't like chocolate. So again, these are foods that some of us think are bad for us in the case of coffee and chocolate, and yet they have more than redeeming qualities. Then we have some international stars, and I was just thrilled when Dr. Riffy started telling me about the bitter melon that you guys have been growing. My actual first opportunity to taste it was when I had to go to Malaysia for work about a month ago. And we were they have 3 different ethnicities, and the night that we had the Indian food at the hotel, I was eating something quite luscious. Of course it was deep fried, so that made it taste good anyway. And I asked the waitress, what is this? Oh, this is Karela. And I said, I remember that. That was in my book. That was the other name for, you know, bitter melon. And of course, bitter melon has, again, a good supply of essential nutrients, and in addition has been shown to affect insulin and blood glucose levels, so maybe a positive thing for diabetes. Mushrooms, you know, when I was in school, basically, you know, you learned that they didn't have too much of anything. Yeah, trace minerals, maybe a little bit of B vitamins. But in those days, we didn't know about the phytochemicals that they possess. And I actually bought for the first time, wish somebody grew them around where I live, inoki mushrooms, which were just a major treat. And again, these mushrooms very high-powered when it comes to antioxidants. I've actually been an arugula fan for quite a while. They call it some different names depending on what state or what country you're in. And again, another true superfood. Now, I haven't been able to taste purslane. Does anybody grow that? Okay. What do you do with it? Yeah, as a green, it also evidently can be cooked as a green as well, and that's also quite a superstar when you look at the profile. And then a bit more exotic. I remember when someone asked me about spirulina, I kind of laughed it off like, oh, that's one of those crackpot, health food kind of things. I thought it was a supplement. And then in writing the book, again, a learning experience, I found out that the Aztecs used to harvest this from the surface of lakes. And they compressed it into a cake, and it made up a part of their diet. So it was loaded with protein, loaded with not just essential nutrients, but also, again, they found quite a few phytochemicals. And it is actually a form of blue-green algae. Kombu, which I've not had a chance to taste, but I have had kelp. So this is a form of seaweed that is typically grown in Japan, but also is gaining popularity in other parts of the world. South America, I understand, and I think even in some of the, maybe Florida. And wheat or barley grass juices is kind of interesting since we're in the School of Agriculture here today. That was actually discovered by, I forgot his first name, but he was an agricultural chemist. And he developed this for his chickens when they were sick. And all of a sudden, his chickens improved to such a remarkable degree and looked so healthy that he started handing it out to his friends and relatives. And that actually was the start of it. And it's also been found to be loaded again, not just with those essential nutrients, but a lot of antioxidants. So how do you incorporate these superfoods into your life? This is what I've kind of been basically recommending, which I also recommended in the book, is, most of us, we don't tend to go past our comfort zone. You probably do because you grow things. But so if you're talking to consumers or you're thinking about some things that you might want to branch out into grow, I think the idea of just adding one new thing you haven't tried at every meal, and then building on that, or maybe you'll pick a superfood in the delete or replace method so that it's going to kick out something else out of your diet. Maybe trying 5 new foods a week. And there are some great resources online. For example, that World's Healthiest Foods. Not only do they give you a slew of different ideas for different foods, but how to prepare them, shows you the nutrient profile. So it's just an excellent resource that you might recommend to people that are purchasing some of your products. And then keep a written portfolio. It's kind of like with everything else that that's done in health. It sort of motivates you, like when you exercise and you write it down, or you keep track of your body weight if you're trying to lose weight. Also, you all know that the pyramid from USDA has been replaced by the plate. And actually, that's not very creative because most of the countries around the world are using this kind of a graphic depiction. So, myplate.gov. And again, you could start thinking about the superfoods in those different categories. But what do Americans think about superfoods? And that kind of ties into what they think about diet and health in general. Well, I just took sort of a smattering of different surveys, but I think Teresa's going to give you even better information, more in depth on this. But I was kind of surprised to see that half of these people that they surveyed wanted their kids to eat a more nutritious breakfast. And I'm thinking to myself, well, aren't you the one giving them their breakfast? But I guess sometimes that's not always the case. 80% call themselves weight conscious. So again, thinking about superfoods that give you those health-promoting nutrients in a small amount of calories. Well, half of the people want to lose weight. 67%, I was very glad to see that. That's 2/3 of us think nutrition is important to their health. And this is the part that I find very interesting. Only 10% think their diet is unhealthy and needs work. So you can see that there's a bit of a disconnect because obviously we know that most people aren't eating very healthfully. But unfortunately, when they think about trying to eat more healthy, they usually turn to supplements. And if you go online, that's where I found these pictures, who needs vitamins and minerals and supplements? Well, dogs need them, cats need them, and evidently dummies need them. So basically, all of us need supplements according to pretty much what you find online. And in fact, half of us report using supplements. Now, you have to think about supplements in a little bit more broad way because, you might think of a multivitamin, but that's not the only thing that's considered a supplement. There's a wide array of products. So not just those pills and capsules, but candy bars, the energy bars, energy drinks, and even what I would call spiked foods. You know, they're not really, like, for example, those cereal flakes really aren't supposed to contain calcium and, you know, twice of the vitamin C you need in a day. So it's just basically added. So in a lot of ways, that really is like taking a pill. And so I think it's important for consumers to start seeing food as where they should get their nutrients. Are they harmful? Are they natural? Well, you can see from the pictures off to the side that they're certainly not natural, these supplements. I mean, you know, those are big production operations and it's a big industry. Are they harmful? Well, some of them aren't even effective. For example, you see the NIH data up at the top. Half of all the supplements were either ineffective or dangerous. And there's some specific ones if you wanted to read later. Or is there a benefit from supplements? You know, about the only one that had a really good track record in terms of the research was glucosamine. And I know some of you probably take that for arthritis pain. And you can see that the most recent thing says, you know, well, actually, it's not very, you know, this doesn't look like it really does much. And on top of that, we don't know if there's any health concern long term. And there's a couple of resources that are good resources to help you with supplements if you're interested. But this is what I really wanted to get to. This is actual documented harm from supplementing. And the very first time we even saw this was back in 1989 among smokers in Finland. So they were smokers, they were high risk. So hey, why don't we give them some antioxidants? So that was called the alpha-tocopherol beta-carotene study. And guess what? The people taking the supplement, they had a higher risk of developing lung cancer. They actually had to stop the study. Well, at the time, everybody was like, well, how can that even be? We know that these nutrients are loaded with antioxidants. How can that actually cause the disease that we think is linked to oxidation? So they kind of dismissed it at first. They said, well, it's probably just a statistical quirk. And then, a little bit later, they did the carrot study. Same idea. Take some high-risk people, give them some supplements, and the same thing happened. Higher lung cancer and higher heart disease risks. So the bottom line is, even very early we saw harm from supplementation, and this list is a little more recent, 2007, and I think the one I want to call your attention to that's most of a concern is that top one, because this is not even a high-powered dose that these men were taking. They noticed that men who took the equivalent of just one or basically one or more multivitamins, and that's just like Centrum, they had a higher risk or twice the risk of fatal prostate cancer compared to men that didn't take a multivitamin. So I think we can see that supplementation is not the answer for gaining these health benefits. And why do you suppose that is? Well, they're kind of no-brainers. It's much easier to reach a toxic level if you're taking a supplement of something. And then, even more importantly, all the research that's linking the health benefits of some of the compounds that we hear about, the antioxidants and so forth, that most of that data is based on food intake, eating lots of fruits and vegetables, eating certain fruits and vegetables. So it's the food, that's where the strongest evidence is, not with supplements. So this is actually a very good quote that goes along with it from Hippocrates, who was the ultimate physician, or at least the most famous. Let food be your medicine and medicine your food, rather than worrying about taking supplements. Now, are people thinking in those terms? Are they consuming more foods to get these benefits? Well, this report just from a month or two ago from CNBC said that the sales of superfoods have exploded as Americans are looking for ways to make their diet more healthy. And more consumers do want their nutrients and these healthy compounds from food rather than supplements. So that's a positive. And in fact, if you look at some of the top-selling superfoods, they're pretty much a list of things that you might expect, but there's a couple of unusual ones. And I was very gratified to see kale, which again, in my old age, I have rediscovered. So to sum it up, superfoods basically means looking at individual foods based on their nutrient and phytochemical profile, but it also can be considered a healthy way of approaching food, a healthy way of eating. And really, Americans in general need to learn more about this link between not just food, weight, health, and disease, but also the importance of choosing food for those healthy things over supplements. So how do you come in? Well, it seems to me you're perfectly positioned because you can help provide the local source, especially as some of these superfoods that are gaining notoriety. And then, of course, you also have the opportunity to give the consumer the knowledge that they need about these things. You've got the great resource of the Extension Service, which they can tell you how that you can work with consumers to tell them how to prepare these things, and the benefits are certainly there as well. So these are some good resources because, again, most of you don't have food labels on the things that you grow. And in particular, of course, the USDA is an excellent database for determining what's in different foods. But the nutrition data, which is the third one down, that one will actually give you % of daily value. So you might be able to, again, type in some of the things that you grow, and then in talking to consumers, you can tell them, hey, this is going to give you, in a one serving size, it's going to give you twice the vitamin C you need for the whole day. Well, I think I would buy that product. Anybody have any questions?